Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Cloud Computing for the C-Suite show with Brad Nelson and David Linthicum, internationally recognised and world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialist placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. This week's show, we are excited to have Bernard Golden as our special guest. Bernard is the Vice President of Cloud Strategy at Capital One, and Bernard is a long-time tech innovator and visionary. Wired.com named him one of the top 10 most influential people in cloud computing, and he is the author and co-author of 5 books, including the best-selling cloud computing book, Amazon Web Services for Dummies. Hi Dave, hi Bernard, a warm welcome to both of you. It's exciting to have 2 tech cloud innovators and visionaries on the C-Suite show this week.
Yeah, it's really great to have Bernard here. I mean, he's been in the business for a long time. When I first started doing the cloud computing thought leadership stuff, he was pretty much the only game in town in terms of people who are writing information that was worthwhile. And so I really appreciate him. He's been on my podcast many times. I'm really glad to have him on the show. Welcome, Bernard.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to come and participate with you.
In this week's show, we'll be talking about an effective way to look at the value of cloud computing for enterprises. Have we crossed the chasm from ops to agility in terms of dealing with cloud return on investment?
Yeah, and this is an article that I wrote in InfoWorld. I almost said Information Week. I'm going to get myself fired as a columnist. Where really talked about the fact that, and they did a survey, and I had some data to back up the survey, in terms of CIOs and CEOs really kind of looking at cloud computing through the eyes of an agility kind of play and a time to market kind of play, versus the whole, ops savings kind of stuff. Because, and still, I have trouble, selling cloud computing in terms of an agility mechanism. The ability to put volatility in domains, spin up servers on demand, and do all the kind of the good things that cloud computing can do. When the reality is, I think a lot of the CIOs and the CEOs and the CFOs out there who are more aligned with these decisions than you think are really kind of focused on the operational cost savings of cloud computing. When certainly I can save somebody 10, 20, sometimes 30%. in doing that, but you really kind of have to understand the value of agility. The ability to do disruption within your industry that you're in is really the value that's going to play. And if there's no play in doing that, in other words, it's going to be very difficult to define the value of agility and the value of time to market, disrupt the industry that you're in. You're unwilling to kind of re-engineer other pieces of your technological stack, DevOps adoption, digital innovation, things like that, then cloud computing is going to have a tremendously diminished value. So what do you think about that, Bernard?
Yeah, well, I think the sort of, is this, if I run a server in a cloud provider, is it cheaper than if I run a server on premise? To me, that's a sort of a naive economics and a naive way of looking at it. And I do think that it's really critical to think about what kind of business benefits you can get from agility. I will say, though, one of the challenges for a lot of IT organizations is they treat cloud like their own data center at the end of a wire. So they continue to have the exact same practices that they've always had, the exact same tooling that they've always used. They just happen to have this cloud thing that now you can get a virtual machine up in 10 minutes instead of 10 weeks or 10 months. But they'll still have the same development practices. They're still following the kind of, well, we have every couple of weeks change control board, and you have to go through all this stuff, and it's ITIL, and it's, we don't really have a good way to track code changes and get them pushed through. So you end up with the same application lifecycle grafted onto really agile infrastructure. And one of the things that, I'll say 2 things. First, if you don't see people saying, this is amazing that I can now get resources and can do stuff so much faster. If you're not feeling that pressure from your line of business groups or your development groups or your developers, I think you have a bigger problem, because that shows that you're not as connected as you should be to those parts of the organization. I mean, my experience is once developers start using this and see that kind of availability and ease of access, they just go crazy, because the friction's so much less. But the second thing is, if you don't start thinking about how do I accelerate every part of the way I do IT to be at the same pace or same cadence as what I can get from the infrastructure, you're probably not going to get as much value out of cloud computing as you could. And so I think it's really important to sort of look at the second order effects and say, okay, now that my infrastructure is really fast, what's the next bottleneck that I have to look at to fix, to remove, to address, so I can get applications and functionality done more quickly and get them out into the marketplace more quickly.
So Bernard, we're talking to different consumers of cloud technology out there in the marketplace. I'm interested in hearing your feedback on this. I mean, is the conversation changing from, kind of tactical view of cloud computing and doing the cost savings, the point you just mentioned, to something that's more strategic, gets to the agility, time to market things? And is it kind of moving into a board level decision versus kind of a project manager level decision? And I kind of see that within my client base, and I see that kind of as a pattern, in the industry as a whole. And the survey that I pointed to in the blog post, points to that as well. But is it a reality in your world as well?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if it's a board level discussion, but it's certainly a senior management level discussion, because again, every company is sort of trying to figure out, how do I, it's a digital world. I'm facing new entrants into my industry. I have to be able to respond. I've got to be faster with that. Cloud, every senior executive is aware of that, and they say, I want to take advantage of it. I don't know if it comes up the board, but it certainly comes up at the senior executive level in my experience. And you don't have to convince individual contributors. I mean, they come out of environments. If they've been in universities over the last 5 years, they've been using cloud computing. They know all about it. They want access to it. I often find that it's kind of middle management that's skeptical, and particularly within IT, which sort of makes sense. If you've spent 10 years being the expert on, network switches and so forth, and then somebody comes along and says, we don't really want to focus on that anymore, you're probably going to say, wait a second. So I don't find resistance in the C-suite, far from it. I don't find resistance at the sort of, I'm going to put fingers in the keyboard. Those aren't the places that I see resistance.
So ultimately, is this something that's going to progress more strategically going forward, or is this going to be, still, kind of at the tactical level for many organizations? So in other words, we're not seeing resistance within the leadership to the point you just made, but is this still going to be a difficult sell at a disruptor, agility, time to market play, versus we're going to save 10, 20% on operational costs?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think what's likely to happen is this dynamic. You're the CEO of some company, whatever company it might be, whatever industry it might be, and you see a competitor, maybe a traditional competitor, who seems to be bringing products to market more quickly, or carrying on different kinds of relationships with customers, or something like that. Or maybe you see a new entrant coming in and chipping away at some of your offering. And they're all based on digital capabilities, mobile. Maybe they're leveraging insights they're getting out of big data, or even machine learning. You're going to turn to your IT organization and say, you've got to get me some of that. How do we get hold of that? And if you get an answer back that says, well, I'm not sure, we're a little skeptical, we're not convinced we're going to adopt it, we're whatever, your answer isn't going to be, okay, well, let me know when you get around to it. It's going to be, well, I'm going to go find somebody else who will give me a different answer. And so something that's positive about this is, I'm sure you've come across this. Gartner's a technology analyst firm. They put forward this notion of bimodal IT, which is basically you have two different IT organizations, one of which kind of sticks to its knitting, does things the old way, and one of which is all in on digital and cloud and so forth. A lot of people resent that or resist it. They say it's not fair, it's not right. But really, if you're the CEO, you're the head of sales, you're the head of marketing at a company, you can't sort of say, I'm just going to wait around for everybody to get convinced. You're going to force change. And so I don't think this is going to remain as a tactical, oh yeah, we have a group doing it and they seem to be great, doing great and getting great stuff. It's going to be like, I have to have everybody doing that to sustain our position, our company's position in the marketplace.
So kind of back to you, Brad. So ultimately, in your role in recruiting, do you see kind of more of a focus on cloud computing as a strategic technology, or ultimately is it still tactically focused, specifically also in your market in Australia?
That's a great question. I think that you've got, going back to what Bernard said, actually, I think it's a very, very good point, is the middle management that are not necessarily wishing to accept, and like we spoke about in the Australia show, the disruptive element of the technology and embracing that. And I think there's a real fear around that. You know, from certain levels of management, from certain aged companies as well. So the fear is that cloud, you know, is going to disrupt their personal life, their job. They don't want to see the return on investment from having an agile platform that's going to do them out of a job. So I think it's one of those things that there is a fear factor behind that that's not embraced. And again, going back to what Bernard said about the CEO really pushing for change, you know, from competitor analysis of other businesses being able to roll out new innovations, SaaS platforms that actually, you know, have AI, machine learning built into it, that can handle the big data, can handle the customer interaction and streamline the whole experience of that business. You know, it needs to be embraced, and I think you've got a lot more people embracing technology in that respect. Yes, there are still fears there. It's still very much strategized. You know, DevOps is a huge thing with regards to that continual investment into the back end. It has to be there. But it's something that is a necessity for a lot of businesses, as well as, you know, getting over that fear factor. I don't know if that's answered the question, though.
Yeah, no, it has answered the question. I think ultimately, you know, and then Bernard, you can chime in here as well. So ultimately, this is something that should be adopted in a different way. And there really is no fear of losing jobs, because if I'm going to disrupt my market and grow my business, you know, 200% in the next 2 years, you know, a lot of the disruptors are out there, especially if I'm a small sized business, then guess what? Jobs for everybody, and, you know, opportunities abound, and bonuses are going to be paid, and we're going to have, you know, success. Basically, with the ability, to Bernard's point, use the enabling technology in productive ways, so we're able to get into markets we haven't been able to get into before. And that's kind of core to what this is. When I look at cloud computing, you know, I don't really I see the technology angle because I'm a technologist, so I'm supposed to be able to explain it. But I also see kind of the business angle as well. And it seems like I'm spending more of my time, you know, talking to the press and talking to my clients and things like that, and really kind of making them understand, you know, why this is an important journey for them to go on, or at least look at how it's going to happen. You know, you still need to understand the requirements and security and governance and all that stuff before you jump first into this. But everybody and anybody should be looking at this technology kind of as a core disruptor as to what they're doing. Bernard, what do you think?
Well, I think that cloud computing represents a sea change in the use of technology. And, you know, every company has to figure out what's my stance going to be about it. I always look at sort of historical analogies, and I view this as being kind of like the change that occurred with the rise of the automobile. You know, it completely transformed our society in ways that, you know, today we don't even really recognize, because it's so baked into our everyday reality. But can you imagine what would have happened in a company that said, yeah, we're not really sure we're going to start delivering our goods by truck, and so they can get there much faster to our customers, or we're not convinced we're going to, you know, locate our office in a place that's convenient for where people live. You know, they would have just eventually gone out of business or been merged or something like that. And I think we're, you know, the cliche is we're in the information age. If you believe the WEF, the World Economic Forum, we're in the fourth industrial age, which is totally focused around digital technologies. You don't have a choice about whether to participate, just like you didn't have a choice about whether you're going to participate in the automobile revolution. There was no safe harbor from that, and I don't think there's going to be a safe harbor from this either.
And that's a great way to close out the show. It's very true. Back to you, Brad.
Yeah, it's a great way of closing out the show. And I think, you know, with disruption and with the influence of cloud and what it can do with regards to the return on investment, the agility of enterprise, there are threats that people will experience personally. They are the threats that in essence can slow down the progression of a business if this person isn't acknowledging or accepting those threats as something they need to deal with for the good of the business. So guys, it's been fantastic. Thanks very much for being part of the C-Suite show this week, Dave and Bernard. It's been a pleasure, Bernard. Thanks for being part of the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
That's been wonderful. And
Peace.
Thanks, Dave, as always, for being part of the show this week.
Take care, man.
Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed watching this week's C-Suite show. Remember to like, comment and subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on any future shows, and also the past shows. We've got quite a collection lined up now that you'd be interested in watching. You can get Bernard on Twitter, which is @BernardGolden, and David Linthicum is on Twitter, which is @DavidLinthicum, and myself on Twitter @Nelson_Hilliard. Thanks again for watching, everyone.